If there's one thing regarding theme parks and roller coasters that everyone seems to agree on, it's that theming is good, and I'm absolutely one of those people. Theming adds to a ride's overall experience by creating a world that the coaster can exist in, whether that be with a unique storyline or something tied to an existing property. Some parks go all out for the theming of their rides, while for others it's more of an afterthought. When taking this into consideration, the easy thing to say would be the more theming the better. But that's not always the case. Theming can absolutely make or break a ride, and there's tons of intricacies when it comes to how well it works. Your view of theming as a concept will most likely depend on where you're from and what parks you've been able to visit. Many corporate parks in America, like Six Flags and Cedar Fair properties, might have great coasters, but for the most part, they're not themed very well. However, many parks in Europe, as well as those owned by Disney and Universal, view theming as an integral part of a ride's experience, as well as to the ambiance of the park as a whole. But how important is theming really? Is it worth millions of dollars of investment, or can a park make do without it? Well, the answer's not as easy as it may seem. I like to classify all types of theming in a park into three categories: the theming not connected to any rides, the theming around a ride, and the theming during the ride itself. Generalized theming around a park is the most important in regards to the park's atmosphere. What a lot of places will do is separate the park into several themed areas, each with a different theme. This allows different areas to have a unique feeling to them so that each area feels fresh and not repetitive. Of course, there's exceptions to this, parks like Efteling and Silver Dollar City that feel the same throughout each section of the park, but are still amazing because of the care and attention put into every aspect. But that's not what you're here for. What about the rides themselves? Theming on a coaster is inherently hard to do because the main appeal of the experience itself is the thrilling aspect. It's much more practical on family coasters where theming is able to be a main focus of the ride. For example, I like to compare two coasters at the same park, Hagrid's and Velocicoaster. Hagrid's is much more tame and relies on a storytelling aspect that carries both the experience in the queue and during the coaster itself. During the actual layout, there's even voiceover inside speakers in the train narrating what's going on. For a ride like Hagrid's, it works well. Due to the coaster's mild nature, the theming is able to shine not just around the attraction, but during it. However, for extreme coasters like Velocicoaster, that just doesn't work. Sure, there's some animatronics in the first half, but the fact is, when you're flying around being thrown every which way, you are not going to be paying attention to story coherency. What works better, and what Velocicoaster does well in its first half, is incorporating scenery that works well with the layout. This is why near misses are so great. You don't have to comprehend what's going on, you just have to think, I'm gonna run into that, or in the case of nice scenery, you go, ooh, pretty. For extreme coasters, theming on-ride can definitely support it, but it can't carry it. Theming is an aspect of an attraction much like capacity or reliability in that it exists outside of the physical ride experience. So as a result, theming can carry those parts outside of the physical ride. Things like the plaza, queue, soundtrack, and interaction can all be bolstered by the effort a park takes to theme the coaster, which Velocicoaster does a fantastic job of. With that being said, a ride can have great theming in the queue and other areas, but not during the layout, and I'd still be fine with it. All that may have sounded a bit confusing, so here's another comparison. Fly at Phantasialand and Carnon at Hansa Park are two of Europe's most themed and highly regarded coasters. But in my mind, one executes the concept much, much better, and if you've been watching the channel for a while, you probably know which one that is. Carnon is an absolute masterclass on how to incorporate theming into an extreme coaster, and it does so even though it has zero on-ride theming from the drop to the final breaks. But everything else about the experience is carried by a clever, coherent, and captivating theme. The queue tells a story, and every room in it serves to support that story. Hansa Park also went above and beyond by including a pre-show, a pre-boarding room, and all the stuff on-ride before the drop, no spoilers. And after you hit the brake run, there's even more surprises that add to the overall experience that were absolutely not necessary, but they're there and they're fantastic. And I haven't even talked about the amazing soundtrack, which is just the cherry on top. And you contrast that with Fly, which is by no means a bad ride or has bad theming. I think it's a technological marvel with how Phantasialand and Vekoma were able to fit this coaster into such a small plot of land and get it to fly over the pathways of Rookburg. But aside from the detail of the land it's in, Fly's theming didn't really impress me as much as I had hoped it would. Everything I praised Karnan for isn't executed nearly as well on Fly, despite the obvious difference in on-ride theming, which is one of the main things Fly has going for it. Fly's queue is good, with some solid views and lots of aviation-related objects scattered around, but it's more of an atmospheric feeling instead of a sensation of awe. An even bigger difference between the two is the pre-boarding procedure. I mentioned the heavily immersive pre-shows on Karnan, but Fly's method is one of the most frustrating I've ever encountered. Both require all articles that riders have on them to be stowed away before the ride. Karnan has these shared compartments that everyone puts their things in and then picks up after the ride. This opens up the possibility of people stealing or accidentally grabbing stuff, but I haven't heard of anything like that happening. Then rows are selected after that in the pre-boarding room, and I love that whole method. However, on Fly, riders can choose to wait for rows 2 to 10 or in a separate queue for the front row before everyone puts their stuff away, which is done using a double-sided locker system. And instead of a single train of riders being admitted to the lockers and metal detectors, which would consist of 2 people from the front row queue and 18 from the main queue, what happened during my visit was that a huge chunk of people would either be admitted from the main queue or the front row queue and given wristbands. This causes a huge problem because the front row queue people would only be admitted 1 out of every, 5 to 10 times. So if you wait for the front row, which I believe to be the best on Fly, you could either be admitted the moment you get in that line and essentially bypass the entire rest of the queue, or have to wait upwards of 30 or 45 minutes even if there was nobody ahead of you in that line. I'm not sure if this is how it usually is, but it was a huge inconvenience for me. So despite Fly's impressive theming and its even more impressive integration into Rookburg, the novelty of the experience is negatively affected by aspects like that hindered my overall enjoyment of it. At the end of the day, theming as a whole is just a singular part of a ride, a part that, if done well, can elevate the coaster from good to great or from great to elite. But if aspects of the theming bring down the enjoyment of an experience, like Fly's boarding system or rides with unnecessary and overcomplicated pre-shows, then maybe parts of the theming need to be re-evaluated. However, what the main difference between Karnan and Fly comes down to is that Karnan's theming only exists during the parts of the experience that aren't part of the physical ride, while Fly's most impressive theming aspects are during the physical ride, which I don't believe to be absolutely necessary. At least in my opinion, Karnan's theming actively improves riders' enjoyment of the experience, while Fly's serves more as scenery, seeking to impress. It's not necessarily about how much you theme a ride, but how well you theme it. Lots of parks simply don't have the budget to throw in elaborate set pieces, animatronics, and rockwork, but do the best possible job with what they're given and create an atmosphere around a coaster that may not necessarily blow guests away with immersion and complexity, but add to the overall experience of the ride and in turn the park as a whole. That's where charm comes in. Charm is a very subjective term when it comes to how it relates to theme parks. Some people might dismissively define it as a sort of, for lack of a better word, cutesiness, but in my eyes it's much more than that. For me, going to a theme park can be an otherworldly, magical experience, and charm is the idea that epitomizes just how magical it can be. There's no one way to include charm, like I said, it's subjective, but it seems to work out in a way that the more effort park management puts into the upkeep of the park itself while adding something special, the more charming it is. I went to quite a few family-owned parks in Europe that were a lot like this. Obviously, you have the big boys like Efteling, Europa Park, and Phantasialand with their swooping sense of scope, but more quaint places like Nigloland and Tripsdrill are special in their own right. They don't try to do anything too elaborate with their coasters, but rather let them play off the rest of the park with a twist to make the ride unique. Overall, what I guess I've been trying to say is that, yeah, theming is good, but a lot of times it seems as if people misplace the parts of the experience where it's important. What is important is when it builds up other aspects like the queue, shown with Karnan as well as so many other great rides, and when parks hit the nail on the head with where and how to incorporate theming into their coasters, it makes them so much better. Anyway, that'll do it for this video. If you want to hear more of my opinions on European theme parks, here's a video ranking every theme park in Europe I visited. If you did end up enjoying this video, leave a like and subscribe because I've got a huge collaborative project in the works, which is one of my biggest videos yet. Other than that, have a great day, goodbye.